Okay, so let's talk about another poisonous plant, but quickly before we do, the other filter for good that donates to Palestine, oh fuck me. The other filter that donates to Palestine is maxed out, so use this one instead, but that's great. It means $14,000 were... Okay, I'm not good at this filter, but the other one was maxed out, so use these ones instead. All of the proceeds are going to Palestine. There we go. So this is the Ryania Speciosa. It is a type of tropical plant found all throughout a bunch of areas in South America. So there isn't actually a ton of information about the plant itself I could find, other than that it lives in South America, and toxins from this plant were used by a bunch of the native people who live there as poison to go on the tips of their arrows, so that's interesting. It also contains a very toxic chemical known as ryanodine. Now again, I couldn't get overly a lot of information about this, but from what I gather, that the poison is most prevalent in the stem and the roots. And since it was used on poison arrows, I'm assuming it has to be just got into your bloodstream either from an open wound, like an arrow puncture, or through ingestion, so like eating it. That's what I would assume from this. So ryanodine affects muscle cells, and it does this by affecting calcium channels. So calcium is very important in muscle contractions. I'm not going to go into the entire mechanism because it's gross and boring, but you need calcium in order for your muscle contractions to actually work. It acts as like a substrate, receptor, whatever. So basically what this poison does is it locks the calcium channels in a kind of half-open, half-shut case, which causes all of the calcium that is stored in what's called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. It causes all of that to be released. Now, calcium release is required for muscle contractions, but not this much. So basically what happens is this massive calcium release causes massive muscle contractions. And those are very painful. So this is not a fun poison to have at all. Now, this results in paralysis, which is not great, but interestingly enough, it has two different kind of mechanisms of paralysis depending on the type of muscles. So in regular striated skeletal muscles, so like the stuff you think of when you commonly think muscles, like your biceps, all that, those striated muscles, they paralyze in a rigid form, which means they're basically just stuck as a contracted form and they can no longer release. So the actin and the myosin, I've gone over this before in my rigor mortis video, but actin and myosin bind together and they cause the contraction, and then they can't unbind, so they're stuck as contracted. And if you're still alive at this point, that hurts a lot. Now, cardiac muscles, so heart muscles, they're also striated, but they're different from the rest of your striated muscles. And these guys also get paralyzed, so the cardiac muscles, they are also paralyzed, but they're not in a contracted state, they're in what's called a flaccid state. Now, this is not a good result either, because if your cardiac muscles are paralyzed, then guess what your heart is not doing, and guess what you need it to do in order to stay alive. Your heart is not beating, and so you are stuck again. It doesn't matter what type of paralysis it is, you're still paralyzed, and it's still not good. So this is a very effective toxin. It is actually commonly used as an insecticide, so we love that because it does have the very same effects on insects as it does on mammals, so it's very effective. I couldn't really find anything on the toxicity, the toxic dose, whatever, but just stay away from these plants, I guess, because you don't really want to get paralyzed from them.